Vitaliy, I'm so excited to be speaking with you today, and thank you so much for being a guest on One Symphony. We've known each other for a pretty long time. I really enjoyed your book, Soul in the Game. You came to me through music, through your love of music, through both of our love of great art and music. You were on a board of the Arapahoe Philharmonic for a bit, and I've taken interest in your work and your thoughts and your just sort of process for being human for a very long time. And I just wanted to start out by asking you, uh, can you just talk about classical music in your life? Because this is a different interview than one I've ever done. Usually I'm interviewing musicians, composers, performers, we've done a poet before. But I love, I see, especially, I mean, I knew, you as a person, but I see now, especially in the book, how much classical music drives your life. And I just love to kind of ask you about that, your relationship with it.
Yeah, no, you're interviewing a civilian for a change. Yeah. uh, uh, well, so classical music came into my life to some degree with kind of almost like my mother's milk. Because I was growing up, grew up in Russia. My mom actually studied and played violin, but she already, by the time she had me, she already forgot how to play violin. Um, but my parents listened to classical music. When we go to we lived in Murmansk, which is a city in the north of Russia, in the northwest of Russia, which, like, you have to realize this was the Soviet times where like buying classical music records was not easy. Like we couldn't buy many of them in Murmansk. So when we would go to Moscow or go to another big city, my parents would go to a store and look for classical music records and buy them. So we had a classical music records at home, and they would listen to classical music. And they never forced me into it, but they would take me to classical music concerts. And the way they would, so they kind of figured out this recipe for, they would bribe me with sweets. They would go to a concert, and during intermission they would buy me some kind of sweet cake or something, or a soda. And that's what really kept me sitting, for the, that's why I went to concerts. I remember I went to Prince Eager. I forget the opera, and I remember I absolutely hated the opera. Well, I didn't get it. I was, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old. But I remember my father bought me this, delicious cake and intermission. That's the only thing I remember from the opera. But also I got lucky because I'm the youngest. I have two older brothers, and my older brothers they went to musical school and they took piano lessons. And I think they absolutely hated it. And I think is the wrong word, because I know they hated it, because my brother literally pulled keys out of piano so he could not, so they would not force him to practice anymore. So I think this was a cry for help. And so my parents finally pulled him out of the musical school. So the interesting thing happened
No,
is
I'm
that
going
my
to edit
oldest,
that out. I'm going to edit all that out because I don't want any young music student to pull keys out of their piano.
yeah, you don't want to give him any ideas. That's right. That's right. um, yeah. So, but the interesting thing happened that my oldest brother, who been subjected to music lesson the longest, now is completely indifferent to classical music. My middle brother, who suffered, less, he is, when we go to concerts, he would, he likes that experience, but I don't think he has this burning desire to listen to classical music. Because I was the youngest, two things happened. Number one, I think my parents learned the lesson and did not push me into classical music, to take music lessons. And also, my mom died when I was 10. And I think like maybe 6 months later, my father took me for piano lessons. And he did not have the energy to keep pushing me. And I did not show that I had much talent, or much interest. So it's kind of faded away until I was 21 years old, or 22. I I watched the movie called Shine about Rachmaninoff Concerto Number Three, and I remember that, like, I knew his second concerto, but I didn't really know much about the third. And that concerto basically like took my life by storm. And I realized I wanted to start taking music lessons. Devin, you realize I'm 20, I forget, I'm 20 something years old, or maybe 20, or maybe 20, maybe 21 years old. And I started taking music lessons. And I insist that instead of doing the ABCs, I start with the rock three. Just
Bum
imagine,
beam bum 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 bum
yeah,
bum 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 bum. I love that.
yeah, yeah, and
It starts
because
very simply.
yeah,
It's when you
well,
get
it's
to like
yeah, but
bar 16 that you just go.
yeah, but it's still the most probably the most difficult piano concerto ever written, and this was my kind of ABC to classical music. I failed miserably, and in all fairness, I just have absolutely no musical talent. But I remember, like even when I was 18 years old in Russia, I had a Walkman, and I only had one tape. Like believe it or not, and that tape was a Kreitzer, the violin. I think it was Kreitzer violin series or something. I forget what it was, but anyway, I just listened to this one tape. Basically, that's that for 6 months, just one tape. Imagine that. So I somehow I got attracted to classical music, and I think in part because it was always in the background and I wasn't pushed into it. And also another thing I remember, I my introduction to Liszt. I remember like, I'm 12 years old, or maybe 10 years old. Sunday morning, my father and I walking outside, and we lived in this huge apartment building. And from the fourth floor, one of our neighbors is blasting some kind of music that I did not know. And my father says, "Oh, she's listening to Liszt." And I tell you this, I just remember, this is 40 years ago or more. And to this day, I remember how much respect and love my father put into saying this. And I guess to some degree, if you look if you look psychologically, we want to please our parents, and maybe this is kind of well, this is why I kind of subconsciously, if you Freud put me on a couch, that's probably it would take me 20 sessions to arrive to that. But I realized this is how I kind of got to classical music. It's just my parents nudged me just a little bit, never too harsh, and just making observations that were very positive about it. And then when I got in, and over time, I just started to listen to classical music more and more as it became more accessible as I moved to the United States. And and I remember I had a job there where it was 30-minute drive each way, so I had plenty of time to listen to classical music. And I listened to Bruch's Violin Concerto probably uh, about 300 times because I would listen to it, on the way to work and back. Anyway, so just anyway, that's a very long answer to your very simple question: how I got into classical music.
That's cool. And you probably listened to the Bruch G minor violin concerto as many times as Bruch did, because after a while, he told people who would come to play it for him, he told them to go play something else. Like
Go,
he
go.
got tired of.
Well, I got to tell you something interesting. And Best Buy used to, like I'm 20 something years old. I'm making very little money, but I wanted to buy classical music. So Best Buy had this. When you walk into the store, it has this rack where it had Dow 99 CDs.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a lot of classical music CDs, Dow 99 CDs, and I think all of them came from some kind of Eastern European orchestra. None of them were
Mm-hmm.
from New York Philharmonic or whatever, or from Berlin Philharmonic or whatever. Uh, um, and so I probably, though there's probably nothing wrong with those recordings, but I was introduced to classical music, to the larger part of classical music through the Eastern European recordings of it. So
It's funny you say that. I was just at a piano festival. We were doing a session with conductors talking with keyboard, piano soloists, and
mm,
how you prepare to come solo with an orchestra. And
mhm.
I had mentioned that, for pianists, like getting ready, like what do you do before that first orchestra rehearsal where you have, it's 2 days before the concert, you sit down, maybe you've played the concerto the first time, this is your first time playing it.
Mhm.
And I suggested, don't listen to the Berlin Philharmonic or the Vienna Philharmonic or the New York
Mhm.
Philharmonic. Listen
Mhm.
to some of these, like you said, like kind of mid-level regional Eastern European orchestras that people go to make recordings on the cheap, because they're not at the level of the Vienna Philharmonic, where you
Mhm.
can't really hear where things can go wrong.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
in these kind of mid-level recordings, even any orchestra that's not one of those top
Mhm.
orchestras,
Mhm.
you're going to hear things that will prepare you to be with
Mhm.
an orchestra, because generally speaking, a young soloist is soloing with not the top, not the New York
Yeah, yeah,
Philharmonic,
yeah.
so they need
Oh,
to
that's
know what might happen. And sometimes on those recordings, even like with Herbert von Karajan in the Berlin Phil in like the 60s and 70s, they were trying to record everything. So
uh-huh.
sometimes they didn't even rehearse it. They put a Tchaikovsky symphony down. So you listen to some of these symphonies, and there are so many kind of just not mistakes, but like things that like are not together, that you can tell they're just trying to plow through the repertoire or something. So
Oh, that's interesting. No, it
that's
makes
cool.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to ask about, my mantra is that music gives us a roadmap to live. Like all these dead composers are artists, and um, they have so much relevance, so much to teach us. And when I read your book, I was looking forward to. It's kind of like you leave the classical music as a dessert platter.
Mhm. Uh-huh.
I was looking forward to getting to that, but I found myself so enthralled, and so just all nodding, or I have to show this to my wife. I was listening to it on an audiobook, and I was rewinding it and playing it for her. And there's all these great, just kind of, you talk about the Stoics, you talk about your kids a lot, you talk about
Uh-huh.
a lot of lessons you've learned and mistakes you've made. But it all comes back to this idea of classical music, and these artists like Tchaikovsky, who failed, who basically wrote his emotions into his music. But
Mhm.
for example, the first piano concerto, the violin concerto, nobody would
Mhm.
play it. Schubert, who essentially died a pauper, and
Mhm.
essentially felt like a failure, and felt like he could never measure up to the success of Beethoven. Um,
Mhm.
all these, and outside of the music, I'm sure the examples abound as well, in terms of dancers, writers,
Mhm.
other creatives. Can you just maybe talk about, sum up, as an investor, like how you are finding value and relevance to the composers that you're discussing?
That is such a great question. Let me tell you how this book came about, because I think that may answer part of the question. Um, so I started writing about investing in 2004. So I've been writing for a long time about investing, and slowly, as the longer I've been doing it, the more it turned into a craft, and the art element started to kind of escape. So, and I and as therefore I started to write more about life, because remember, I have this all these degrees in finance, etc. I taught investments at university, and this is my day job. So I'm the guy who should be writing about investing. But over time, I started to write about life, about trips, about different things that happened to me. And then one day, I started to include classical music. And at the time, YouTube. At the time now, I could include YouTube was already there, so I could include YouTube links, and I would include in my investment emails. I would have a section about classical music. And in the beginning, I would just include links to performances. But then I started to kind of write about the composers. Again, what does it mean? I started to write. Well, I had to read a lot, so I had to start to read a lot more. And the more I read, the more I realized that there are so many similarities between composing music and any creative activity. And so let me bring you how this book came about. So for people so I have a large readership, and these people who to read my articles, they come from my investment articles. But over time, I started to get these emails which say, Vitaliy, I came to you for your investment articles, but I'm really staying for your life, for your life stories and classical music. And some people would say you should write, you should take your articles and put them into a book, just about non-investment topics. And I always dismissed it. And then August 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I am writing about Tchaikovsky sextet for strings. And I started to do more research on this. And I realized how, and I read the letters he wrote to his brother and I think Nadezhda Van Meck and others. And there, for Tchaikovsky, this was a new type of composition. He was not familiar with that. And I think he may, I forget how, why he wrote it, but it was basically a favor to somebody. And if you read his letters, he was completely miserable writing it, completely miserable. And he was complaining all the time. And there was and as I was reading this, I realized he's describing my experience as a writer. When I write, I go through all the same emotions. So I ended up writing this article where I basically wrote about Tchaikovsky's struggles and how they relate to writing and kind of provided solutions to that. And afterwards, I finished the article, realized, oh my God, this could actually help somebody. Like really, like somebody who is struggling as a writer, they could see that when we listen to Tchaikovsky music. So today we listen to Tchaikovsky music and we are mesmerized by that. Mm-hmm. But what we don't realize, how much he struggled to write it. And we take that for granted. And so after I wrote this essay about this, I realized, oh my God, if I just take my articles, I already kind of been doing it for a long time, and put them into a book, this could actually help others. This could help people who, struggling, as a parents or whatever. Just there are so many life stories I wrote. Anyway, that's how my book came about. But that's why I'm so attracted to composers, because a lot of them, there's like a lot of them basically, there's so many lessons we can learn from them. And I think, and this is what I try to convey in my book. And I'll draw a parallel between Schubert and investing. Okay, so, and by the way, a long time ago, and I think I actually even wrote about this. You played Schubert's symphony, or I forget what you played. You at the Boulder the Boulder symphony. You played one of the Schubert's pieces and before the concert you gave a talk where you talk about Schubert's being in the shadow of Beethoven. So you should get part of the credit.
It was called Beethoven's Shadow, that concert.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly. So,
and it was Schubert's Unfinished, right? The seventh, D minor.
Yeah. So, so Schubert's, I'm gonna, you can do so much better job telling the story. But so
you're the guest. You're the guest.
All right. But anyway, so just to simplify this, Schubert lives in Vienna, where Beethoven is this incredible superstar. He's not just superstar in Vienna. He's kind of the Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra, and Beyonce all together around the world, right? And if you if you're a composer and you're composing something, anything you do compose is always compared to Beethoven. So, and Beethoven says, with every piece he writes, he sets these new standards and elevates them and creates new type of music. And as a composer, you feel like you don't measure up. That's why you feel like you're in the shadow of Beethoven. And as you mentioned, Schubert, when he died, most of his work wasn't published for this reason. And in any profession, I would argue this. So this is where the parallel is with almost any profession. In any profession, you're going to have this incredible superstar, who is like in investing. There was Warren Buffett, And I don't want to turn this podcast too much into investing podcast, but this is an interesting analogy. So when Warren Buffett, who is 80, 90 something years old, in his late 70s or in his 70s, said, I don't buy technology stocks because I don't understand them. Which kind of makes sense for a guy who is 70 something years old, who spent most of his life living in a time where there was very little technology, decides that he's going to focus on things he understands. So he's not going to buy technology stocks. But what happened, a lot of 20-year-olds listened to that and said, listen, I'm not going to buy technology stocks because I don't understand it. So what they did, they just parroted Buffett. Okay. And they just basically kind of stayed in the shadow of Buffett without escaping the shadow. And again, that does not diminish Schubert's music, but I would argue that if he, he would have a lot more self-confidence and maybe to try to get his music performed if he didn't feel like, he doesn't measure up to Buffett. And by the way, and all the listeners who love Beethoven, and he's not even my favorite composer. Like, I would listen to Schubert over Beethoven anytime. This is me, okay? And I'm sorry for this, but this is, again, doesn't mean I'm right. It's just, I'm not saying this. I'm just saying Schubert clicks more with me than Beethoven. It's somehow it's tuned more into my melancholy or whatever. It's, like I can listen to his whole symphony from start to finish. And I'll be honest, I don't think I ever finished listening Beethoven Ninth from start to finish. I just not my, I love parts of it, but not the whole symphony. Again, it doesn't make it right. It's just, this is how I'm wired. This is why,
if you put on some glasses,
uh-huh.
you would have a semblance of Schubert's, of his face with the beard and everything. Well, you've already lived a lot longer than him, but
well, that's true. And I'm just unshaved, and I'm just, but I think the getting out of the shadow of others. So we always, in any creative profession, in any creative endeavor, there's always going to be somebody who is a lot more successful than you are. And I think you should be looking to find how you're different, and not just think about what this person thinks, but more importantly, to think how this person thinks. And this is important because what the lesson you should have gotten from Warren Buffett is not that you should not, as an investor, you should not be buying technology stocks. The lesson you should have gotten that you should be staying in a circle of competence. For Buffett, that was technology stocks were not that. And so he did not buy technology stocks. For you, that may be a circle of competence. And the irony of this whole thing with Buffett, 5 or 7 years ago, Buffett takes $10-15 billion or some huge amount of money, I forget, and buys Apple, which is the largest technology company in the world. And this is one of the most successful investments ever made because of how much money he made, not in the rate of return, but how much money he made. So Buffett grew. The old Buffett would not buy technology stocks, but this new Buffett has learned, how to look Apple differently, and he bought Apple. And so this is one of the lessons we can learn from Schubert. And one thing that I would argue is, and you can please disagree with me, but we will never really know the damage Beethoven caused to classical music, because how many other Schuberts? No, really, how many other Schuberts never published their music? Like, really, how many? Like, Schubert's was rediscovered by Mendelssohn, right? If I remember right, but after his death. But how many Schuberts are out there that just never published their work because they never measured up to Beethoven? Okay, again, I'm not. This is not anti-Beethoven show. I mean, in a podcast, and is not.
That's going to be the quote on the picture for the podcast. We'll never know how much damage Beethoven caused to classical music. He actually did. He did cause a lot of damage. He broke the box. He demolished the whole thing. But I think that's a cool point, and it's interesting that you take to Schubert more than Beethoven, because I mean, most people, that is the populist way to go, is Beethoven. But I can see, Schubert wrote so many songs. Like, he sat at the piano and he sang, And
Yeah.
he had the Schubertiads where he brought his friends together, and in the afternoons they started just playing music together and drinking
Mhm.
and eating. But I can see he's got this kind of soulful song, kind of melody that he
Mhm.
creates that Beethoven doesn't. I mean, of course, Beethoven writes great melodies, no question, but
Mhm.
Beethoven doesn't, I feel, have this ability. And that's why Beethoven wanted to be an opera composer. He only wrote one, Leonora, later changed to Fidelio, and
Yeah.
that kind of was a bomb in many
Uh-huh.
ways. So he never
Uh-huh.
got back to it. Schubert, you said, I don't remember how many operas he had. He had 15 or 20 operas or something that were never played. But Schubert has this ability to take a line. And I think Bruckner, you talk about Bruckner too. I think
Yeah.
Bruckner takes a lot from Schubert, has this ability to look at these larger forms and create music that really, melodies that really go right. And Tchaikovsky loved Schubert too. Obviously, he loved Mozart, but he
Yeah.
loved Schubert. Beethoven was more, he was just trying to break everything apart in every way in his life. I mean, from the fact that he couldn't keep an apartment for more than a year in Vienna because he was such a
Mm.
slob, so to speak, to the fact that he would owe money at all these bars. He would get kicked out of all these bars that he went to because he didn't pay his bills, and he made a
Mhm.
mess, and he made a scene all the time. I think just his way, he just wasn't meant for this earth in many ways. Like he couldn't really live here, so he brought this music that really exploded everything, and like you said, it did. I think I've never thought about that. I mean, I do think sometimes about, if there's Mozart, there's Haydn, there's Schubert,
Mhm.
and then there's Beethoven, of course, but how many, I mean, there's dozens of composers writing at the level of these composers in the time in Vienna, and how much music was lost, how much music was not published. I think that's a really great, it's really something cool to think about.
Like when I discover a composer that is unknown, and I usually email it to you, like, or unknown at least. Like I thought it was, the composer was unknown. It was unknown to me at least. Like like Eugene Dalbert, right, who
Hmm.
wrote this beautiful piano concertos, or I forget the guy's first name, Moskovsky, who wrote this incredible piano concertos, and most like you never hear they're absolutely incredible piano concertos, but you never hear them perform. And Because I heard recently I heard a story about why Mona Lisa is so famous as the painting. Do you know the story? It's a beautiful story. So the Mona Lisa, was in the Louvre forever. Like, as Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, there was forever. And then in the beginning of last century, it gets stolen, and it's basically was it one day it suddenly disappeared from the wall, and um, it's basically creates this international headlines, like it's in newspapers around the world for years, for like, because the mystery of this. And even Pablo Picasso is accused because he lived not far away of that he might have stolen, and then somebody else gets, I forget, JP, I think JP Morgan or somebody else gets accused of that. It's basically becomes this huge story, and then they find that this Italian guy who lived nearby just basically went into the gallery, into the museum, took it and went home. And he claimed that he did it for nationalistic reasons because he felt it belongs to Italy. Anyway, and when he tries to sell it, they catch him. And so when they return Mona Lisa to Louvre, it becomes this iconic painting that we talk about today,
Mm.
right? So like I look at this, I'll be honest, and this is like now I'm going to go into history as a anti Beethoven guy and anti Mona Lisa. I'm indifferent. Like I'm not, first of all, I'm not anti Beethoven, but I'm completely indifferent to Mona Lisa. Like does absolutely nothing for me. I went to Louvre. I looked at it. It was under this very protective glass, etc. It looked like, it just didn't do anything for me. Um, but if it was not stolen, it probably would have been just another painting.
Hmm.
In And you would argue that if Leonard Bernstein did not was not a big fan of Mahler, Mahler probably, we would not be listening to his music today.
Maybe not.
So it's
And
so random.
same with Mendelssohn with Bach. I mean,
Yes,
Mendelssohn revived Bach in the 1830s
yeah, and to me, actually, Mendelssohn is more important, not as a composer as much as a person who brought Schubert, who brought
as a
Bach.
presenter. Yeah.
So what I was gonna say is that it's a very random which composer we listen to today, and there's so many composers that kind of went into the footnotes of history just because they didn't have that luck, like they didn't have the Leonard Bernstein or Mendelssohn, or their work was not stolen or something, and etc. So.
Yeah. And I think it's cool how you talk about this idea of comparing, and you say in the book,
Mhm.
don't let the external environment barge in and set goals for you. Right. And then you talk
Yes.
about the investor who jumped off the building, who
Yeah.
mistakenly lent his self-worth to his portfolio. And I mean, anybody, like, I'm in the arts, so I've never been in anything else. So, but we compare ourselves constantly. I think of myself as a conductor instead of just like a human being who's, a husband, a father, a person.
Hmm.
Right. So it's so
Hmm.
easy to do that. And I think that's a trap that everybody falls into, and you can let it sort of eat away at you little by little, or you can say, this is who I am. And then you bring up this idea of using pain and harvesting pain. And I think that's, and one of my great mentors called it the ugly face of opportunity.
Hmm.
And
I like
that's
it.
the hallmark of these great composers. They hold on to their. Tchaikovsky could have easily killed himself, and he arguably did. When he was in his 50s.
Can you imagine
But
like what Tchaikovsky, how boring his music would have been if he was a straight man?
yeah, he would have an easy life. Yeah, he wouldn't have had to hide anything. And
Uh,
Schubert could have, not continued to write. I mean, none of his stuff was ever published. So who's listening to it? He's writing for himself, just like you wrote your book
yeah,
for
yeah,
yourself. Like, so I think I would love to maybe hear a little bit about that idea of harvesting pain, because
yeah,
that's the thing about life. You're going to get hit with pain, right? If it doesn't come when you're 40, it's going to come when you're 50. If it doesn't come, it's going to hit you. You're going to get knocked down probably multiple times. And it's more about that's an opportunity.
if you do anything creative, it comes with pain. Because think about it. I mean, imagine instead of being a conductor or musician or a writer or an investor, you and I had a job of working on a Fiat or General Motors assembly line. How much predictability do we have in our life? You would come to work, you do the same thing over and over again for 8 hours, you go home. There is completely no art in what you do, right? It's a complete predictability, etc. Now, when you do something creative, but almost by definition, there is uncertainty, and that uncertainty comes with upside and downside. Upside is that this feeling of curiosity. You're kind of curious, how is it? What is going to look like when I'm done with that? And but then there is also fear of failure, and these two conflicting emotions. Like one is, it happens to me every time I sit down to write, because I have no idea how it's going to look like when I'm done with that. And there's a fear of failure, and this curiosity, and they constantly conflict. And guess what? Sometimes I fail, and I fail plenty as a writer, as an investor, etc. And this, when you fail, that's where the pain comes from. And that pain, first of all, you should not be doing anything creative if you don't expect that at some point you're going to have pain. This is like negative, like Stoics would call it negative visualization. So you have to, as a conductor, you have to basically accept the fact that at some point you're going to study a new piece of music with the orchestra, and you guys are going to suck. And that is just part of you pushing your boundaries and you learning new things, you creating new things. Because I would guarantee if you played unfinished symphony, performed it every day for 3 years, it would have sounded perfect. Though I would argue maybe in the year two, you would have lost it would have lost the whole soul, because there would be all no all craft and no art at that point. But anyway, but the point is, it's because you constantly pick new repertoire, new music. This is when you grow. Um, and so, like, if you think about composers, the ones like I don't know if you can name a single happy composer. Maybe there are, um, but Beethoven was deaf. Uh, Tchaikovsky, was
Yeah,
was
I
basically
mean,
gay.
Britten, Barber, Bernstein. I mean, they're all, yes, even some degrees of success, varying. They're
Yeah,
all, if you get into their lives,
there was a
they're
plenty of
not.
misery.
Yeah, they're not. They didn't live for themselves, so to speak.
Bruckner was basically celibate because I mean he was looking for a bride, his whole life. He was a kind of religious fanatic looking for a
And
life.
he was
For
he
life.
was God's property in some
That's
ways.
right. That's right. He was writing for God. Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. He was unleashed from God. Yes. Uh, uh, and so, but Rachmaninoff. I mean, actually, this is the one that actually like I am the I used to be proud to be from Russia, not anymore. So now I say I'm from USSR. But like if I think about Rahman, like composers, they're very dear to me, and maybe because I came from Russia, maybe that's somehow the music clicks with me more, like Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky, and I think Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto, he wrote it after he failed with his first symphony, and that failure was so significant that I think he was in therapy for a few years. And and we will never know the truth, but I would argue if he didn't fail his first symphony, his second concerto would have been very different. Probably we don't know worse, better or worse, but I think it's perfect. So whatever it would have been would not be as good. uh,
And the funny thing about that, and I loved that section in your book when you talk about Rachmaninoff, is that the first symphony, and I've done the Rhapsody on the Theme of Paganini, I've done the symphonic variations, I've never done the first symphony, but the first symphony is fantastic music. Like that's the thing. Like you find about all these like big failures and
mhm,
and composer that, I mean, if you play the long game, and sometimes, yeah, that's after you're dead.
yeah.
It wasn't a failure, it was a success. And it's sometimes
So
I think we put too much, and you talk a lot about this,
mhm.
or you make this point. It's that we put a lot of stock in what other people say about us, like, and
Oh my
about
god.
whether it's critics in classical music or this fear of failure, like we talked about.
Oh yes, I mean it's internal scorecard. Buffett, has a term for this: internal scorecard or external scorecard. Okay, you have or Stoics would call it dichotomy of control, and they would say some things are up to us and some things aren't. Well, the things that are up to us are so limited. Like it's basically your character, your values. It's what you do when it comes to composing music or creating art. It's your effort. That's all you can do. It's your process, your effort, and then the outcome is completely, or it's even more. Even if you create this wonderful piece of work, uh, if you're lucky, it will be stolen and it will become this masterpiece. It will become the painting everybody goes to in a museum. If you're unlucky and it's not stolen or whatever, then guess what? It's a completely not up to you. And the story, the sad story I told in the book about this value investor, a guy actually I've met a few times, who was first of all, then what's important to understand, this guy was worth a few $100 million. He had a very respected in the industry, but value investing, like it's like as a style, was going through a very difficult time. And he basically had a positive but kind of not inspiring return for 10 years. And he identified himself as a value investor, and that was his main identity. And one day, as I read in the book, he basically went up to the 10th, took elevator to the 10th floor of his building and plunged to his death. And he was, I don't know, 50 something years old. The irony of this, if he just held his portfolio for 3 more years, it would have showed incredible returns, and it would have proven him right. Okay. The point I want to, this is a very nuanced point I want to make. Our identity, what we think we are, how we perceive ourselves, is under our control. It's something we actually write for ourselves. And we can, if we are mindful about this, we have an opportunity to carefully craft our identity, because you are a lot more than a conductor and musician. You are a father. You are, there are so many other things, right? And if we just only create one identity, we are setting ourselves for failure, because at some point that part of identity will misfire and will be miserable. So, we have to carefully curate how we frame ourselves. My identity is a student of life. I, I'm a person who wants to continue to learn, and that identity allows me to. One big advantage of this is that I look at failure differently. Like, I'll give an example. I in my old age, I decided I'm going to start taking chess seriously, and I played chess all my life, but I always played it kind of just as a, like, sometimes I didn't play for a decade, so just uh, so I never took chess lessons, never took it seriously. But now that my kids are playing chess, especially my 16-year-old daughter, I feel like, first of all, I don't like losing to her. But second, and as importantly, I realize as I get older, we exercise. We go to gym to exercise our body, but we actually need to exercise our brain as well. And chess is that exercise that I actually really enjoy. But I'll tell you this: I lose chess a lot. When I play chess, I lose a lot. And if I approach chess as a student of life, basically failure or losing games is just part of a learning experience. It doesn't sting as much. And so my ego does not take over. And because what happens after you lose plenty, you say, I don't want to play this game. I lose. Or you can say, oh my God, this is such a great learning experience. This is what I learned this time I lost. Anyway, so uh, I'm not sure what question I was answering, but yeah.
How, I mean, if somebody reads the book, this is very clear, but maybe you can answer this
Mm.
to put some butts in the seats. How much have your kids influenced kind of all the lessons that you've laid out here in the learning experiences as a student of life?
I think your kids allow you to experience life again, kind of from a fresh perspective. Um, uh, I enjoy, like, we just came from a trip from Europe, and I went with my two older kids, and we basically visited 4 countries. We spent 3 days in Netherlands with my youngest daughter, with my middle daughter, and all we spent 7 days in Switzerland, Italy, and France with both kids. And I cannot tell you how much joy I received looking through at Europe through my daughter's eye, because she's been there for the first time. For her, everything that we went to was fresh. She was shocked how beautiful these lakes are in Switzerland, how rude French are to you in France, and how, like, all these different, and um I like, my kids is probably, like, I would argue that a lot of my intellectual development is thanks to my kids, because I just kind of, when I'm teaching them, when I experience life with them, I'm kind of relearning it, from a very fresh perspective. Um, Chess, and, like, and then like, and, like, as I mentioned, chess, I just started playing chess myself, more seriously, just because my 16-year-old daughter decided when she was 15 that she wants to start playing chess, and she beats me. Like, she beats me with such an ease that it's, somewhat frustrating at times. But I, like, when I lose to her, like when we play, I kind of have this attitude. I always win. Here's why: if I lose, it means she wins. So I'm very proud of her as a father. And when I win, I win. So that's my attitude towards that. But anyway, yeah. So that's my kids are my 8-year-old daughter. You can appreciate this. She's taking music lessons, and she had a change in the music teacher, and the music teacher in the first lesson asked her, "What's your favorite?" Kind of, she's talking to 8-year-old. What's your favorite music? Do you like Disney's Frozen or whatever? And she lists some Disney's movies, etc. And she's like, "No, I like this." And honest to God, she plays a few notes from the Per morning
Oh,
morning song. Yeah,
morning mood.
and then from Dvorak's Symphony Number Ninth, like a
Wow.
few notes, just just she
Amazing.
was shocked. So was I. Actually, I tell you, I
She's
was
gonna
on
be
the
like,
verge of
"Who? I have to meet your father."
yeah, I was on the verge of crying. I gotta tell you, uh, because of my experience with classical music and my brothers, I never forced my kids to play a musical instrument. So, force is not the right word. They took music lessons, piano lessons, and we tried different teachers, and neither one of them, like my older kids, had an interest in this. None. And my 8-year-old, when she was 6 or 7, she took music lessons, and she hated that. We didn't push her. And then maybe 4 or 5 months ago, she we have a piano in our living room, which is basically just a piece of furniture because nobody plays it. I don't play piano, but it's there for my
It's good.
young
It's
kids.
good for putting like organizing papers on top of
Yeah,
it.
exactly. That's it. Yeah, exactly. And I've stuff things that you don't use. Yeah, put things on top you don't use. And she suddenly sits down and starts kind of playing her own music. And I think as a father, that is my responsibility to notice that, and then try to nudge her very carefully into into music. And you have to be very careful. So when we told her, let's do you want to take music lessons, she's like, Absolutely no." And I said, we have this music school, and it's right next to a yogurt place. So every time you take you to music lessons, you get yogurt. She's like, "Fine." And now she's like, like, at some point in time, like, it's so at some point we'll take the training wheels off, and she will not be, maybe she'll be eating yogurt maybe once every 3 lessons, and then
Yeah,
once every 10 lessons. But that's how, like, again, I think this is like sugar, like, people in our society frowns on sugar, and I understand why, but I think it's a really great educational tool.
that's what got you into it.
That's right.
And of course, it's apropos because the last book of your the last chapter of your book is "Don't Eat Sugar," right?
That's
Or
right. That's right.
intermission, "Don't eat sugar."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Actually, I was very proud of the chapter because I really I didn't know how to finish the book.
it's perfect.
And,
It's perfect. A little story with the Dalai Lama. Was
yeah,
it the Dalai Lama or just a monk? I can't remember. Was it?
I don't know. I'd say I don't know where I heard this story. It's Dalai Lama. I'm not sure it's even true, but it doesn't matter
Do you want to tell the
because
story? It's a
sure,
great
sure,
short
yeah,
story.
yeah. Um, yeah. So this mother brings her son to Dalai Lama and said, "Listen, my son eats just too much sugar. Can you please talk to him?" Dalai Lama looks at him, the mother looks at the son and says, "Okay, why did you come back in a month?" Okay, the month says, "Okay." So in the month, she comes back, brings her son, and she says, "Well, you told me to come back. Here we are." The Lama looks at her and the son and says to his son, "Stop eating sugar." The mother is like shocked. She's like, like, why did you have to wait a month to come back? You could have told us the same thing, a month ago. He said, "Yes, you're right, but first I have to stop eating sugar myself." And this book to me is me trying to stop eating sugar. And by the way, the word "trying" is very important. Is that because, like, if you read this book, it sounds like I'm an expert that never fails at anything I'm writing about, and it's anything but. In fact, Stoic philosophy I'm discussing there, it's a practice. It's a practice because what you're trying to do, you're basically trying to reprogram yourself. Like however old you are, whatever you were doing for previous, you know, years of your life, you're trying to reprogram yourself, and that reprogramming those habits, etc. It's a very lengthy process. That's gonna where you're gonna succeed and you're gonna fail a lot. And if you look at it as practice, as you're trying to stop eating sugar, then you realize that when you fail, just think about what you can learn from this. Don't don't over penalize yourself. Don't over too hard on yourself. Just keep going forward. So it's a like I call this the last chapter an intermission because like I'm not even 50 years old yet, and who am I to write about music about this definite book about life? Because whatever thoughts I have today, I might change my mind 6 months from now, 6 years from now. So I basically this is I call this book Volume One because I'll keep writing and I'll keep changing my mind and learning, and then I may rewrite certain things I wrote or write have new ideas that are contradictory to what I wrote. So yeah, that's the last
And
chapter of the book.
you also say every day is a new life.
Yeah, this concept from Seneca is so wonderful. Um, like on New Year, we set a New Year's resolution what we're gonna accomplish. Yeah, for the next year, and
People still do that?
and people do this. I mean, this like gym memberships skyrocket like
Yeah, yeah, of
in the
course.
first
Yeah,
few
yeah.
weeks of the year, and then on the February 15th, we already forgot about it or sooner. Seneca had this idea of what if you look at your day, every day you try to live as your last day or as your only day. You behave that day. You kind of you almost like setting New Year's resolution for every day. If you have a and the beauty of that is just it's such a short period of time. It's very measurable. And if you just have a perfect day or try to get, and by the way, when I say perfect, it doesn't mean when you drive to work, every light is going to be green. But what it means is that if you drive to work and every light is red, you behave in according to your values. You don't curse, you don't get stressed about it. And if you keep doing this every day, guess what? You're going to have a great life. And then and the interesting part is that because it's only such a short period of time, and then the day, just look back on your day and say, how can I change? What can I tweak to, for the next day to be better?
Well, the book is Soul in the Game by Vitaliy Katsenelson. Thanks so much, Vitaliy, for joining me on One Symphony today. You can get the book wherever you get your books. I think it's available on all platforms. And
Yeah.
I would just recommend anybody in or out of the music business or profession. This is an incredible treatise on life, and thank you, Vitaliy, for kind of selling my mission, which is this: how art and music brings relevance and meaning to our lives. I couldn't have said it better, and I hope everybody gets this book. Thank you, Vitaliy.
I have this website. It's called My Favorite Classical,
Yes.
where I write where I write about classical. It has nothing to do with investing at all, and it's a special mailing list where I just share my. Every Saturday, you get a different classical music piece from me, and I share my thoughts about classical music composers. And it's just my favorite classical.com. It's my kind of altruistic, kind of adventure, kind of venture into classical music. So I hope your people who listen to to this podcast, in addition to getting the book, of course, also sign up for the go to my favorite classical and sign up for my emails. And then, by the way, there was a lot of writing. There's a lot of music on that website already. So
Yeah, and that's for myfavoriteclassical.com is for people who know about classical music, but also for people who are just getting into it. And I'm
yeah,
thinking that your book, Soul in the Game, I think a lot of people are going to read that and say, "Oh my gosh, look at what classical music can do for me." And
yeah,
I would say if you check out the book, check out this blog, My Favorite Classical. And it's also got some brilliant paintings by your father as well that you share.
That's right, my brother. Yes, I have this goal in life. I want people to listen to classical music and love it. I find the problem is classical music at times it's complex. It's a feature and a bug at the same time. So like it took me, I don't know how many times I had to listen to Rachmaninoff's Symphony Number 2 for it to be like click with me. But it requires work at a lot of times before you get all the pleasure. Now, I created this playlist that's on that website on my favorite classical.com, which I call a gateway drug to classical music. And the reason I call it gateway drug to classical music because it's a carefully curated list where basically I picked pieces that if you listen to and you are indifferent to classical music, if you listen to it, you will you can't help but fall in love with classical music.
I could name some: Beethoven 7, Schubert Unfinished, Tchaikovsky Symphony Number 4, Tchaikovsky 5, Tchaikovsky 6,
Let me
Liszt
disagree.
B minor piano sonata. But let's hear
No,
your
but see,
list.
no. See, let me disagree with you a little bit. Let me tell you why. You're right. Those, by the way, those are you listed my favorite piece of music. But like I'll give a perfect example: Tchaikovsky Symphony Number 4. Imagine this: I am in Sydney, Australia, and I went to this is where I heard the symphony for the first time, conducted by Vladimir Ashkenazy. I listened to the symphony, and it did absolutely nothing for me. That I listened to for the first time after the symphony. Imagine I'm in like this is one of the best orchestras. Vladimir Ashkenazy, conducting it, does nothing for me. And then I talked to my father, and he says, "Oh my God, that's my favorite symphony." I'm like, "How could it be your favorite symphony?" And just listen to it. It was horrible. He's like, "No, it's a great symphony." I listened to it 5 more times, and it is now my favorite symphony. The problem is the symphony; it's a complex, right? So you don't
Yeah.
get it the first time.
Yeah.
So no, so then I know my goal was to do better than that. My goal is eventually to get you hooked on Symphony Number 4, but to get there, I had to create a different playlist. Let me give you. I pulled it up.
Well, and
Okay,
let me
you see.
before you read that, let me just respond to that. I think that is the trade of classical music. I think, and that's one of the reasons why I loved it so early, because you can't understand it. Like there is a separation from it. Like you have to put some time in, but at the same time, I feel like once you've done, say you're somebody like me or an orchestral musician or a pianist, once you've
Mhm.
been doing this for 20, 30 years, our job is to figure out how to bring some listener along the first time, right? So I feel
Yes.
like no matter how great the hall or the orchestra or the conductor, if we didn't pull you in, like that's at least partly on us. Like it's how we're presenting it. Like because with Tchaikovsky 4, for example, I feel like if you just play the symphony to somebody who's never heard it or doesn't know anything about Tchaikovsky, it's going to go over their head. But if you can talk about how Tchaikovsky's struggle, being a gay man, being having so
Mhm.
many psychological issues, and essentially, I mean, because one of the things is you talk about, it's hard to be in pain and to compose uplifting music, or to be healthy and compose a funeral march.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to make a caveat on that a little bit, because you listen to the last movement of Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony.
Uh-huh.
It's just this it's like the best party you've ever been to, and the guy is so depressed. Or you listen to the third movement of the Patatik, the Sixth
Uh-huh.
Symphony.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this is joyous music. Or Beethoven's, when he was writing the Heiligenstadt Testament, when it was his suicide note. He was
Uh-huh.
writing the Fourth Symphony, the Second Symphony, the most happy music in the world. So I think I mean, I guess I'm getting off on a tangent a bit, but
Yeah.
in a nutshell, I think us as performers, like that lies on us to bring people in.
By the way, you do this beautifully because I remember when you played Berlioz' Fantastique, you gave a beautiful speech. I mean, beautiful lecture, not speech, lecture about it. And about this, and that actually helped you to understand the music so much better. And so you can do that, but I think this is like I would argue if somebody like so I would argue that even that's not enough. again, I'm not taking anything away from this music because it is beautiful and I love it. So don't get me wrong. But I think it's you need to stop. This is like, okay, this is horrible analogy, but this is like crack cocaine, where you need to start with pot. Okay, so this is why I call the gateway drug to classical music.
We're going back to Berlioz now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes, that's right. So let me let me just read it to you, and you see what I mean. Okay. And okay, I started with the Mozart's Piano Concerto number 21, and first movement. Rachmaninoff Rhapsody on Tim Paganini, number 18. Not the whole thing, just number 18.
Yeah, the 2/3 mark.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Then Grieg's Piano Concerto number 1, second movement. It's see what I'm doing? I'm doing very selectively.
Yeah.
Because even though the whole concerto is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but you can't help but not to fall in love with the concerto. This one has a perfect track record. I'll give you this. Shostakovich Piano Concerto number 2, Andante, second movement.
Yeah, the one he wrote for his son. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll give you a couple more. The Chopin's Piano Concerto number 2, I think second movement again. By the way, it's like
Wonderful.
Second movements usually they're the
that's where the heart and soul is. Yeah.
Yes, and I keep going. So it's so what I did it in a very surgically. Like this playlist is I'll send you know what I'll do? I'll send you a link to this so you can put it in the show notes. I shared with a lot of people who, after reading my article, say, I would like to learn about classical music, but I don't know where to start. And that's why I did it. After this, you can go to crack cocaine. So,
well, for those of our listeners who aren't necessarily into classical music now, Vitaly's just given you a roadmap to get there. If you've gotten this far in the podcast and now you're saying, okay, I don't know some of these composers, I'm going to go check it out. Here it is. Like, right. Don't listen to my recommendations. Listen to Vitaly's. Start with Vitaly's recommendations and then go to mine.
No, but by the way, this is like your recommendations are step 2.
Yeah.
Which is, I agree with you 100%.
That's the crack cocaine.
That's right. It's a step 2. Yeah.
And then you go to Berlioz and with the opioids.
And then you go to Berlioz. Yes. No, then you go to Berlioz. Yes. Yeah.
I'm very grateful, Vitaliy, for your contributions to music and this art of life and bringing the art and the craft together. And it's been such a great joy speaking with you.
Devin, it's my pleasure. And thank you for being my friend. And thank you for all you do for classical music. And I really mean this.